There's a long tradition of loners in cinema. Loners have been protagonists, victims, villains, and occasionally all at the same time. More so in horror cinema, in itself a cinema of outsiders. In horror, the loner can be both human or a monster. Writer Edgar Allan Poe said, "The scariest monsters are the ones that lurk within our souls." And horror films often use the supernatural to confront that which is most difficult to discuss in everyday life. And Saint Maud is a perfect amalgamation of these two approaches. On the one hand, art house cinema's love for outsider characters, those who don't quite fit in and whose interior life is bubbling with intense, barely contained feelings. The outsider protagonist in these films often tries to fit in, but the nuances of social norms and relationships escape them, often because they're still grasping with past trauma or adjusting to a new environment. On the other hand, Rose Glass's film follows in the footsteps of horror cinema that walks the line between the supernatural and the grounded, having us question reality just as much as the protagonist does. So how do both of these threads combine in Saint Maud, and what does the film add to the subgenre of loner cinema? The loner as a character acts as our gateway into a complicated, unfeeling world. We see this world through their eyes and feel the weight of isolation, the desire to connect, and the inability to do so. The loner is often at odds with their surroundings in the film. This can be played for laughs, simultaneously making fun of the environment and the loner, or it can illustrate the gulf that exists between the protagonist and everyone else. One of the key parallels to Saint Maud is Martin Scorsese's revered 1976 film Taxi Driver, about a restless Vietnam War vet aching to connect and build meaningful relationships. Scorsese himself was in turn inspired by Robert Bresson's 1951 film Diary of a Country Priest, about a socially inept priest that is alienated by the very parish he's meant to be leading. Just like Maud, and just like the priest, Travis Bickle reaches out and is desperate for connection, but inevitably fails, coming off as weird or downright inappropriate to those he tries to befriend. The disillusionment and rejection of these awkward advances sends the loner into a spiral of rage. With Maud, like with many female characters, this rage is turned inward, punishing herself for failing to build a relationship that lasts. These characters often despise the world around them, seeing it as callous, hostile, immoral, or sinful. And this again is a manifestation of that rage and loneliness. In Saint Maud, Maud is a hospice nurse rebuilding her life after a traumatic work incident that is hinted at, but never fully explained. We meet Maud with blood on her hands, and throughout the film, the imagery of the incident reappears, symbolizing her unresolved feelings of guilt, though never fully addressed head-on. The trauma runs deep, but instead of addressing it, Maud only covers it up by separating herself from the person she was when it happened. Maud is both a loner and a potentially dangerous figure. The film teases us with hints at supernatural powers, a direct access to God, or perhaps it's all just a deeply troubled, unstable psyche talking to itself. Whilst Maud, whether you choose to see her as an actual saint or not, is only human, amongst the cinematic loners of the monstrous kind, the vampire reigns supreme. In Anna Lily Poor's The Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, the girl separates herself from everyone because of her nature. She's a vampire, and the vampire, immortal, is destined to outlive and be separated from humans because of their dietary needs. And so, the girl only seduces people that she wants to eat. Until, of course, she meets Arash. The loners in these films, whether human or supernatural, are either new to a town or removed from their family. They have no friendship group or significant other. They're self-sufficient, self-reliant, and proactive, but fundamentally isolated and paralyzed in their growth because of that. The most simple social tasks tend to land awkwardly. Maud gives herself a new name, takes on a new job, falls deeper into religious fervor. Maud's reinvention of herself, the strict routine, the uniform she gives herself, is a way of taking back control. Like a lot of loners in these films, their self-improvement is actually a form of self-harm. With Maud, this takes on the form of religious self-flagellation, which she sees as a way of purifying herself. a more saintly way of ridding herself of anything ungodly and unworthy. But when the loner finds someone that seems to be the solution to their identity crisis, the lack of connection with the world and the people around them pushes them deeper inwards, creating an even bigger gulf between them and everyone else, a breeding ground for rage and obsession. Unable to be a person like other people, the loner latches onto the first connection they can find. But instead of building a relationship, they give themselves a task.
MAUD is my savior, you see. She's been looking out for me in more ways than one, but...
And this task usually involves saving someone from the world they hate and see as contaminated and cruel. The loner justifies their disconnect from the world by framing it as a mission to save it. In this sense, another key example is Lynn Ramsey's You Were Never Really Here, where the protagonist Joe is also an ex-military man, now turned hired gun and living with his ailing mother. Joe is tasked with rescuing a young girl, Nina, from a brothel for wealthy patrons. Things get more complicated, but protecting Nina becomes more than a job. It becomes a mission. The savior complex runs deep in the films dedicated to exploring loneliness. Joe wants to save Nina, Travis wants to save Iris, the girl wants to save Arash. Granted, she wants to save him from herself, but still. And Maud? Maud wants to save Amanda. Just like Travis Bickle fixates on saving the teenage sex worker Iris and Taxi Driver, Maud fixates on saving the soul of the dying dancer Amanda.
To save my soul, if I understand correctly.
Far from an innocent, Amanda appears to Maud to be in need of saving. Previously a successful dancer and choreographer, now frail from illness and wallowing in self-pity and hedonism, Amanda initially welcomes this attention. As an artist who used her own body as her easel, Amanda's self-exile in a small English town is her own way of regaining control of her surroundings and how she is perceived now that her body, which was once her tool, has failed her. If she can't save her body, Maud can try to save her soul. But while for Amanda this is a distraction, for Maud it quickly becomes an obsession. In this way, the loner is closer to a vigilante in their desire to help and their faith in their own ability to do so. Their focus is obsessive and becomes a driving force behind the loner, often driving them to extreme violence. The loner doesn't want to hurt the object of their obsession. They see them as an innocent at risk or in the process of being corrupted by a toxic environment. But in the process of trying to save them, they often end up hurting them. In St. Maud, even after Maud is fired by Amanda, her obsession doesn't stop. It's the only thing that gives her meaning. Without someone to save, without a mission, she's more isolated than ever before, and self-doubt takes over. The greatest power of horror cinema is translating empathy into images. St. Maud cleverly builds on a history of art house cinema that zeroes in on the lonely and obsessive mind, but elevates the intensity of this loneliness, as well as the burden of unaddressed trauma, by framing it as a horror film. The excess of horror makes it a less grueling watch because it's easier to distance ourselves from the otherworldly. It's easier to underestimate its emotional impact because extreme situations like possessions, exorcisms, and demonic apparitions are not designed to be relatable. But by building on the stylistic depictions of loneliness in independent cinema and drawing from the visual language of isolation by filmmakers like Lynn Ramsey and Martin Scorsese, St. Maud makes us feel what Maud is feeling. The isolation, the trauma, the desire to connect, the need of a purpose, the rejection. The havoc inevitably wreaked on both herself and those around her is tragically preventable, and St. Maud is most unnerving because none of us are that far away from being Maud.